There is something that happens in a toxic relationship that can make it incredibly difficult to break free from. This is called a trauma bond. Today I'm going to be sharing the truth about trauma bonds. I'm going to be talking about what a trauma bond is, how to break free from it, and the thing that I do differently from most other practitioners that helps my clients to break free from a trauma bond when they've tried a lot of other modalities and it hasn't helped. Before we talk about what a trauma bond is, we actually have to start talking about attachment. So what is attachment? Attachment is the glue that we feel when we're in a relationship, that feeling of being connected, of feeling bonded. And how does that happen? That actually develops through emotions. We develop an emotional connection with the person we're with. We bond through the positive emotions that we feel, the happiness, the joy, the love, all of that stuff. And then we also bond through the quote unquote negative emotions, like sometimes sadness or sometimes fear, anxiety. That is all normal, and that is what attachment is. It's that glue, it's that connection that we feel in a relationship. So that's considered healthy when the relationship is healthy. When it veers into a trauma bond is when that relationship is not healthy. We feel an emotional connection, an emotional bond to a person who hurts us repeatedly, who is abusive to us, who demonstrates hot and cold behavior. That's when we get into trouble. So a trauma bond is the emotional attachment that happens when we're in a toxic relationship. It's that glue that keeps us there when there are cycles of abuse, cycles of devaluation, meaning they put you up on a pedestal and then boom, you're off that pedestal and they see you very negatively. When your partner is hot and cold, when there are intense emotions going on in that relationship, that bond, that glue that is keeping you together can turn out to be so strong and so sticky that it makes it very, very difficult to disentangle from that relationship. It's quite literally like an addiction. It forms this intense connection that only intensifies through the roller coaster of emotions. So it's very different from a healthy relationship. The same attachment mechanism is going on, the same way that we bond in a healthy relationship through emotions. But since the emotions in a toxic relationship can be so intense, so up and down, that glue, that bond ends up being much stronger and much harder to break away from than what we would consider a healthy relationship. So again, it's the same attachment mechanism as a healthy relationship, but when it turns into a trauma bond is when the relationship is not healthy for us, when it's hurting us, and due to that feeling of attachment, it's very difficult for us to break free from. And this is quite literally like an addiction. There are behavioral studies in animals that show that intermittent reinforcement, the hot and cold behavior, the positive and then the negative reinforcement, creates this bond that is so much more difficult to break than what we would call a healthy bond, where people are being treated well. It is quite literally an addiction. And this makes it so much harder to leave. What also tends to happen to us when we're in these toxic relationships where there's a trauma bond is if we are empathic, we can feel empathy for this person in the relationship. And you can understand, if you are someone who is empathic, who has that ability to really put yourself in someone else's shoes, that someone who is acting in a hurtful way, in an abusive way, we know on some level that they can't be happy, right? And so when we see that, we think, oh, I feel for them. They're hurting. I can't just leave this relationship. I can't abandon them. I need to stay because they need me, because they're going to be alone if I leave. Whatever the story is that we're telling ourselves, and that makes it much harder to leave. We understand that they must have their own baggage just like we do. And so we feel like, well, I wouldn't want someone to abandon me. So how can I leave this relationship? I know that they're hurting. I see that. They just need me to love them and everything will eventually be okay. That also makes it harder to leave. That is also what keeps that trauma bond going strong. So here are some characteristics that can help you to figure out if you are in a trauma bond or not. So one of the first things is that you feel unhappy in the relationship. Like, you don't really like the relationship. You don't want to be here. You know you're not being treated well, but it feels impossible to leave. Like, no matter what you do, you try, you get psyched up, maybe you even actually leave the relationship, but then the pain or the emotional distress is so difficult that you can't stay away. It pulls you back in. That's an indication that you might be experiencing a trauma bond. Another sign that you might be experiencing a trauma bond is if you do make an attempt to leave and your partner says, "No, wait, please don't leave. Let me fix this. I promise things are going to be different. I'm going to change." And then they don't actually do that. No change is happening. That's a really big indicator that you may be in a trauma bond. Another indicator is that you fixate on the good days. So, like, in order to keep yourself from leaving because you feel so bad, you remind yourself over and over again, "Oh no, like, I know he loves me. I remember that day when he did this, when he treated me so well. No, that means he loves me and I'm okay here. I can stay." That's another sign you might be in a trauma bond. A trauma bond can make it very difficult to see objectively the realities of the relationship because it feels like you really can't leave. You're kind of stuck there in this love bond with this other person when it really isn't love. Another sign that you might be in a trauma bond is that you make excuses for their behavior. So on some level, you know that, yeah, you know what, this shouldn't be happening in my relationship, but you excuse it. You say, "Well, I know they had a stressful day," or "I know that he had a difficult childhood and this is from his trauma. That's the reason why he's not treating me well. And so it's okay. I can accept it." That's a sign you might be in a trauma bond. Another sign that you might be experiencing a trauma bond is that you continue to hold out hope that one day this relationship will change. Your partner may have given you no indication that anything is going to be different, but you're still holding out hope, hoping that just one day this miracle will happen. He'll have this massive realization and all of a sudden things can be different. That's an indication that you may be in a trauma bond. And then the last indicator here is that you actually make attempts to protect them. You don't tell other people about what's actually going on in the relationship. You feel reluctant to really share the truth of what's happening in that relationship. That's another sign that you may be experiencing a trauma bond. So the reason I'm sharing all of this information with you today is because I have experienced trauma bonds myself. I had a tremendous amount of difficulty breaking free from relationships that I was in. I held out hope for a long, long time. And what finally made me get to the point where I was able to see clearly and to feel like, okay, yeah, you know what? This is bad. I'm not being treated well. I need to leave here in spite of my emotional discomfort, was some of the help that I was receiving from other people, specifically a certain modality that I'm going to talk about at the end of this video here, so stay tuned with me. So how do you break free? What can you do? I'm going to go through some of the most important steps here. The most important step here to help you break free is to get support. I'm here for you if you need support, but I don't care if you talk to me or anybody else. Just please do not try to break free from a trauma bond on your own. It's going to be so difficult. The more support that you can get when you're in this situation, the better. Because I'm going to be brutally honest with you here, breaking free from a trauma bond can be incredibly difficult. It's not something that anyone should go through on their own. So do whatever you can to get the maximum support that you can. One of the best resources that I have found personally, beyond some of the modalities that I use that I'm going to talk about, are women's shelters. And I know women can be reluctant to reach out for support from these places because they think, well, you know, I don't actually want to have to go to a women's shelter. You don't have to. They have so many resources for anyone who is experiencing abuse, who just needs help getting out, who needs some practical resources to help get you out of that situation so you can start to break free from that trauma bond. And it's also so important to get external support because what we want to try to do here is shift that attachment, that unhealthy attachment to this person who is not good for you, to someone who is healthy. We want to start cultivating new, healthier attachments. And so the more support you can get from safe people, the easier it's going to feel for you to shift out of that relationship, knowing you have some other support, knowing you're not just going to be out there alone in the world. You have other people there to help you. So lean on friends at this time, lean on family if you have them, and make sure you're also getting professional support. Because not everybody can relate to having gone through a trauma bond. And so you might be talking to some friends and maybe they can be super helpful, and that's awesome. Maybe some of them, they don't quite get it. They may say some things like, well, just leave. Like, aren't you happy that you've left? If you haven't gone through it, it can be difficult to understand. So also make sure you're getting professional support. I worked with therapists, I worked with coaches. I threw the book at the things I was going through. And so I recommend that for you as well. The next step to breaking free from a trauma bond is to actually leave the relationship and go no contact. Now, I know that when I say this, a lot of people, for them and for me too at the time, it can strike fear in your heart. It can feel like, oh my God, no, I can't do that. I'm here to tell you that you can. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. It will be quite literally one of the hardest things that you'll do. But it gets easier the longer you do it. Here's the thing, a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship, like I said earlier in the video, it is quite literally an addiction. So you do have to treat it like an addiction. So for example, someone who is an alcoholic, when they decide, all right, you know what, I can't do this anymore, like I need to go into recovery, they don't tell them to start out just drinking a little bit. Like we get that you want to eventually quit drinking and get healthy. So, okay, yeah, just start out, just drink like 1 glass of wine a day. And then eventually you'll taper off. No, they don't do that, right? They say, you have to quit cold turkey right away. This is the only way that we know to help you break free from this addiction. And unfortunately, it is the same with toxic relationships. Now, all this being said, I know that this is not doable for everyone immediately because of some of the reactions that our nervous system has. I get it that it can be incredibly difficult to do this all at once. If that's the case, I do recommend taking baby steps. Like if this is your ex, maybe you don't want to completely block them everywhere and go completely no contact right away, but maybe you unfriend them from Facebook. Maybe you stop following them on Instagram. Maybe you block them on Snapchat. And that's how you start. And you work through that discomfort that comes up when you put that barrier up so that eventually you can get to the point where you can completely go no contact. Because as long as you're in touch with this person, as long as you're still seeing their stuff on social media, as long as you're still hearing about them, you're still going to be on that emotional roller coaster. If you step off of it completely and just be done, then yes, it's incredibly difficult in the beginning, but pretty quickly after that, you will level out. Things will start to get better. So my recommendation is to go no contact as soon as possible because that is your best chance for healing as quickly as possible. And again, that's why I emphasize step number 1, make sure you are getting support when you're going through this process because it's not going to be easy. But you can do it, I promise you. I've done it. Many of the women I've worked with have done it. You can get through it too. So step number 3 that I recommend to help you break free from a trauma bond is to replace that unhealthy addiction with a healthy addiction. Now, I know we can say that like all addictions are bad, right? Well, okay, yes, technically. But most of us here are not going to go through the complete healing process that would involve letting go of every single one of our unhealthy attachments, or even just our attachments in general. That would be considered spiritual enlightenment. Really hard to do, not necessary. So when I say replace our unhealthy addictions with healthy addictions, what I'm meaning is just moving our dependence or our attachment from an unhealthy person to a healthy thing. So, for example, if you're really drawn to the idea of working out, going for a walk, if that feels really good to you, whenever you feel that urge to reach out to that ex, you go and take a walk. you go to the gym. You do what you need to do to break free from that addiction. Now, this isn't like a magic wand here. This isn't going to shift this instantly, but over time, you're going to slowly rewire your brain to go for that healthier attachment versus going back to that toxic ex. So what this does is this creates new dopamine pathways in your brain. The old dopamine pathways were connected to your ex, and every time you heard from them, every time you saw them, you got that little boost. It felt good for a minute, right? So we're shifting that to something that is actually truly healthy for you, like exercise. Or for you, maybe it's like art. Maybe what you like to do is take pictures, you like to paint, you like to make something with your hands. Whatever the thing is that feels good for you to do, again, when you feel that urge, you shift to that thing that is healthier for you. Is it going to be the same as that connection with your ex? No, it's not. It's not going to feel as fulfilling in the beginning. It's not going to feel like that same click, but it's going to feel good. The more you do it, the better you're going to feel over time. And then over time, you have this new routine, you have this new pathway that is healthy for you that feels so much better than going back to your ex. There is something to be said here in this step for distracting yourself. So I'm never going to condone or recommend suppressing your emotions, but in this particular case, when we're just trying to break that toxic relationship pattern, when we're trying to withdraw from an ex, I do recommend doing things to take your mind off of that urge. So whatever it is, maybe it's like binging YouTube videos, just like watching mindless TV for a while. Do whatever you need to do that's going to take the focus off of your ex and to help you work through that urge to reach out. It can be really difficult in the beginning, but again, over time, the more you practice it, the easier it's going to get. It is like developing resilience. It's so hard at first, but if you keep doing it, if you don't give up, it will get easier over time. Step number 4 for breaking free from a trauma bond is the thing that I talked about in the beginning of the video. This is what I do to help my clients break free from a trauma bond. I help them to release their emotional baggage that is keeping that trauma bond intact. So remember when I talked about in the beginning of the video how attachment works. So attachment, again, is the bond that we feel, the connection that we feel, the attachment that develops through emotion. So in order to unwind the trauma bond, what I help my clients do is we get to the root of the emotional energies that are keeping that trauma bond intact. Very often there are energies like abandonment, shame, fear, grief that are making this person feel impossible to break free from. Using a very powerful energy healing modality that has been just a breakthrough for me and for many of my clients, we slowly unwind the trauma bond. So we release the layers, the emotional energies that are keeping that trauma bond intact, and slowly, the trauma bond releases. And the women I work with are able to move on from that relationship and have much healthier relationships. This is what worked for me, and it's also what's worked for so many of my clients to be able to finally break free, even after going to therapy and trying lots of other modalities that haven't quite worked for them. So again, remember that what keeps the trauma bond intact are the emotional energies, and so once we release them, that is what helps us to break free from a trauma bond. So if you're interested in working with me, I'm going to leave a link to the different programs that I offer where I use this modality. I do this in the X Detox, it's a 3-week program, and I also use this modality in my 12-week program, Living Free, Finding Love. So you can check out both of those here in the description. So that is the truth about trauma bonds. If you guys have more questions about the intricacies of a trauma bond, please leave a comment below and I'll try to make a video on that. If you want to learn more about how to spot red flags that can lead to a toxic relationship, click here. I have a video for you. And please do click here to subscribe. I come out with new videos on how to break free from toxic relationships and create healthy love every week.